Okay, this is Mike Benoit of Tyranny Busters fame. I'm also the current chair of the San Diego Libertarian Party and the local director for the Fully Informed Jury Association here in San Diego. I'm going to give a talk tonight that I've been giving to local Kiwanis clubs and quite rave reviews. You might get a little different idea on the basis of what our government was founded on, and maybe a little different understanding of what's happening now versus what should be happening. I've invited a few people to join us. I don't know if this will work, the link, but right now it's just you and me. So I'm going to start off with, of course, we're going to be talking about the Fully Informed Jury Association and the book by Frederic Bastiat, The Law. Now, something recently caught my eye, and it was, I pondered for a long time what was going on with our American system and why is it that people have so many different ideas on what rights are. And some folks think you have a right to health care. Some folks think you have a right to be fed. Some folks think you have a right to a minimum wage. And so these rights that they think they have impose an obligation on somebody else. I just can't see how anything we do or any right that we might have imposes any obligation upon anybody else except to leave us alone, to not violate our rights. Now, most of us we're familiar with the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, and we understand what he said when in the Declaration of Independence it says that we were created with certain inalienable rights or inalienable rights, and that among these were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so to me, it's really easy for people to get confused. If you have an inalienable right to life, that doesn't imply that you have to do anything for it, or pursuit of happiness, or liberty. So the big question comes, how could that be defined better? And so I did a little research with Thomas Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration. And I'm going to read that because I don't want to lose the spirit of that Declaration, the original. Jefferson's original draft. We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, self-evident, that all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive in rights inherent and inalienables, among which are the preservation. I'm going to read that again. Among which are the preservation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How is it different to say you have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness with you have an inalienable right to preserve your life, your liberty, pursuit of happiness, or property? Inalienable right to preserve that. That's a little different. That doesn't put any obligation on anybody else. That just says you have these things and you have the right to preserve these things. Said the other way could be construed quite easily that you have the right to be fed, you have the right to health care, you have the right to education. And of course, that's Marxism, that's communism, and those folks can have that opinion. But those of us who don't have that opinion, who have the opinion of Thomas Jefferson, Frederic Bastiat, as explained in the law. Now, if you go fast forward about 75 years, after the penning of the Declaration of Independence, you'll find that Frederic Bastiat wrote a book called The Law. And basically, it's quite simple concept. And he kind of like ties in with Jefferson's original Declaration. And there's so many good stuff in this pamphlet that I just pulled out. I just pulled out sections of the law, and it's loaded, and we're not going to be able to cover that in a half hour. But he says each of us has a natural right. So atheists, it's a natural right. He goes on to say from God. You don't have to agree with that part. To defend his person, his liberty, and his property. We have a natural right to defend those things. Now, Jefferson, in the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, written 75 years before this, had the same conclusion. So that we have this natural right to defend this stuff. Now, Bastiat goes on to explain that since these are the three basic requirements of life, and the preservation of any one of them is completely dependent upon the preservation of the other two, for what are our faculties but the extension of our individuality? And what is property but an extension of our faculties? If every person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows a group of men have the right to organize and support a common force to protect these rights constantly. So, and he goes on to explain that this is the sole purpose of law. Okay, so if you have this right of self-defense, the law has to be written for that purpose and that purpose alone. Now you get off into the Marxist, communist, socialist ideas that you have, say, a right to a minimum wage. Now, that imposes an obligation on a person that might want to employ you. That is a perversion of law on them. They no longer have a right to defend their liberty to contract, nor does the minimum wage person have a right to defend his ability to contract. Possibly the minimum wage person would work for $1 or $2 an hour less than the minimum wage, knowing that was the value of his labor. So neither one of these parties any longer have the liberty to contract. So that is what Bastiat refers to in the law as a perversion of the law. Okay, or you could use another example. I mean, government, and during my talk that I gave at the Libertarian Supper Club last week, which was supposed to be broadcast out and was cut in the middle, I addressed the issue of things like family court. The family court system, a big thick book, not yay big, was nothing but organized injustice. And that's, by the way, what I pulled out of Frederic Bastiat's book, The Law, which is a very thin book anyways, is the sections that just relate to injustice. And when the law gets perverted to act as injustice instead of doing what it was supposed to do, and that is restore justice once an injustice has occurred. For example, if you stole something from me, and there's an injustice, okay? Now, what's the law supposed to do? Well, before there was the law, I'd go over there and do what I needed to do to take it back from me. Well, we decided that things would work better if we organized laws around this, and we brought the matter before neutral people. So there's an example of the law. Now, what if the law gets perverted and it decides that someone writes a piece of legislation that says that the government can take from me that which I earn and give it to someone else that doesn't earn that? What is that? Well, that's what Bastiat would consider, and so do I, as the law perverted. So they've perverted the law to being an instrument of plunder instead of dealing with that which is plunder. Now, a lot of folks that I know in the liberty movement are trying to, fight. They're fighting desperately to try to overturn what we have is basically millions of tyrannies. And what are tyrannies? Well, again, I refer to Thomas Jefferson when he swore on the altar of God an eternal hostility over every form of tyranny upon the mind of man. So tyrannies in that respect is that which has been used to control the mind of man and has turned our system, basically of morality, of a just society, into a society of plunder. Lots of us talk about the days of slavery and how bad that was. Well, that's gone as far as individuals owning other individuals, but now it's back, and with government being the agent. And in a sense, those that are dependent, welfare, on the dole, they own the labor of those that are producing through government mandates, laws that are not laws, but they're a perversion of the law. So let's tie all this into the jury. Now, the rights of the jury. Basically, when you go in and you're, in the jury pool and you're looking to select people for the jury, and say in criminal case, what they're going to do is they're going to tell you that you have no right, no power to judge the law. And you're only able to judge the facts of the case. And that the law will be given to you by the court, and basically you have to accept that. If you won't accept that, then you're going to get thrown on. Well, why is that wrong? Why is that a perversion? I know a lot of folks said that, well, if the law is wrong, they have this idea that if the law is wrong, then you get, elect legislators that will change it. Easier said than done, totally impractical. But let's look back at our history on what the jury is and what the jury's power is. And it came to us, well, the jury is probably much older than this, but directly came to us from England. And the most famous trial was the trial of William Penn. And of course, before that, the Magna Carta played a big role in this. But William Penn was on trial for his life, and it had to do with breaking a law that had to do with preaching an outlawed religion, if you will. And if he was found guilty of the crime, he would have been sentenced to death. Well, after a trial, and this interesting book on this, it's called The Ordeal of Edward Buchel. He was the jury foreman. But after the trial, the jury panel decided to find William Penn and the other not so famous William, who was also tried for the same crime. They found them not guilty. Do you think that would be the end of it there? Well, no, that wasn't the end of it. There's a three-judge panel that was presiding, and they admonished the jury for their decision and told them go back into the deliberation room and to deliberate some more and to come back with a right verdict. Now, this was over a religious issue of religious freedom. Well, they did, and where they were sent back up into the jury room, it was overnight. I think there were several nights involved total on this experience. No food, no water, no toiletry provisions. They had to relieve themselves in the corner. And the townspeople ended up smuggling up food for them in buckets to relieve themselves. And so after they did their deliberation again, they went back down and they gave their verdict as not guilty. The judges were furious again, sent them back up. And I believe it was only 3 times, but finally, after the 3rd time, the judges, obviously quite angered and distressed by the whole situation, decided to fine all the jurors for their verdict. Well, 4 of the juries, or jurors, including Edward Buchel, the foreman, would not pay the fine. So the judges had them arrested, thrown in prison. And it was a very unpleasant prison. And they were in there for a considerable amount of time. They got a barrister to take their case, someone that was pretty well known, and he actually took it through different channels than had been ever taken before. The long and the short of that is that they won their case, and it was determined that the jury's verdict, as long as there wasn't, bribery, blackmail, it was an honest decision, a good faith belief, then the jury's verdict could not be questioned. Right, so what did they do? They nullified what Bastiat would refer to as a perversion of law. We have a right to defend our liberty. That right includes practicing the religion of our choice. But throughout history of governments have been known to very quickly start to write laws, control and impose the will of other people onto other people. So anyway, we've come forward a little bit more, and now we're in America. And now there's a trial with Peter Zenger, who is a publisher and of a newspaper, publisher editor, and he had been charged with violating the libel laws because he had said bad things about the government. Well, it turns out the things he said about the governor were true, but the libel law didn't take that in consideration. You can't say bad things about, the executive, or the chief executive, and charged with libel. So he actually broke the law. Well, his jury, with the help of a guy named Andrew Hamilton, who was somebody who was present at the William Penn trial in England. Andrew Hamilton helped get him a verdict of not guilty on the same basis that the jury overturned the law. Now, we're going to go forward a little bit to Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson. Ironic thing about these two men is that Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Abraham Lincoln did not. Abraham Lincoln was credited by many people as freeing the slaves, but they had a different viewpoint on the law. Jefferson expressed his viewpoint with a statement that he considered that the trial by jury was the strongest anchor against tyranny in government yet devised by man. Well, what does that mean? Well, tyranny, of course, is taking control of something or violating someone's right, and that the jury could do that, could turn that tyranny upside down. Now, Abraham Lincoln had a different viewpoint. He said as long as it was the law, you had to respect it. In fact, he's on record for respecting the law called the Fugitive Slave Act, which Jefferson would have actually opposed and encouraged people to apply jury nullification. Now, under the Fugitive Slave Act, slaves who had escaped the South were to be hunted, caught, prosecuted, sent back down to their former owners, and anybody that helped them in that endeavor was to be prosecuted and convicted. Well, guess what? Jury nullification came out there to nullify this perversion of law, because people were just exercising their right to be free, and all it takes is informed citizens to say not guilty, and to use that power of the jury box. So you got two different attitudes by two men that are down in American history as pretty great individuals. And it's very ironic to find that Jefferson's viewpoint was more on the side of freedom, and Lincoln's viewpoint was more on the side of tyranny or control. Because Lincoln had the idea that if you didn't, even if the law is bad, if you didn't respect it, then you'd lose all respect for law. Well, Jefferson had the idea if the law was bad and you respected it, then the rest of the law lost its respect. So two different viewpoints there. And of course, under jury nullification, we saw examples of that when it came to the whiskey or the alcohol prohibition. And people were refusing to convict people on those sorts of crimes. And fully informed jury, you know, it's not just what was the crime, was they guilty of a crime. You got things that can be broken down into the sections here. No real crime, just a perversion of law that somebody's charged with, or a real crime, but the penalty is just astronomical, idiotic. And so fully informed juries, if they're going to find somebody guilty, well, you know, what if they found, oh yeah, the guy stole a nickel candy bar, and the penalty for stealing the nickel candy bar wasn't told to them. The penalty turned to be cut his hand off. Well, so who decides that the guy gets his hand cut off? The jury, without even knowing that's what they're deciding. So that's a tyranny upon the jury. And this interesting thing, and today you get the judges and lawyers coming out of law school, they're all taught this, that the jury cannot judge the facts in a criminal case. Well, you go way back to first Supreme Court Justice, I think it was one of the first, John Jay, and he says, yeah, sure, they have this power, but we don't have to tell them. So where it's degraded all the way down to the point now where people are told the opposite. So this is a huge tyranny upon the minds of man, a huge tyranny upon justice, a huge injustice. Now, see, and what happens, people are getting all up in arms and saying, oh, if you let people know they have the right to nullify law. No, they're not nullifying law. First, they have to have an understanding of what is law and what's a perversion of law. They're nullifying a perversion of law. For example, if somebody murdered somebody and we write a law and that there'll be a trial and there'll be penalties for this, and found guilty, the penalty would be from X to Z, A to Z, and the jury making the decision again there for what the penalty would be. So that's, and then they'll say, O.J. Simpson, jury nullification. No, those people were not saying, we don't think that murder should be a crime. Just like the William Penn trial was saying, practicing a religion of your choice should not be a crime. That's not what the O.J. Simpson trial was doing. They were going, they don't think O.J. did it. They think Whitey set him up or that he was set up, et cetera, et cetera. So this wasn't a matter of nullifying a law that was, say, about a real crime. Americans, the polled Americans, except for the 0.2% or whoever that are criminally insane, they're going to continue to say that murder, rape, robbery, these things are crimes. Fraud, these things are crimes. But see, if to get a gigantic Leviathan state like we have now that's sucking the energy out of us, you have to have this idea inculcated into your head that, these laws are all good for us and they're all there and they're providing security. And of course, that goes back to the old idea of giving up liberty for security. And again, this old idea. And so when people start to look at, is this law a law based on the individual's right to lawful defense of life, liberty, and property? Or is the law based in a perversion of that? Does it violate life, liberty, and property? I tell people that the handicapped parking space is a perversion of law. It violates life, liberty, and property. The people that own the parking lot, that own the businesses, have to give up their property to someone's specific use. They have to spend some of their property to paint the spot in a certain way to indicate that, and and they're prohibited from using it for any other purpose, even can't use it themselves. So that's about, and people will say, well, yeah, but that's good for that's good for the handicapped. You know, the quote attributed to Benjamin Franklin when he said, when you give up liberty for security, you will end up with neither. Well, that's a good example, because I'm going down to Balboa Park last week, trying to find a parking space over there by the museums, the aerospace museums. A little bit of a job, but driving around the parking lot, we could have had a soccer match in the area that had been reserved for handicap. So, and then I saw this really old couple who could barely walk, had to walk a long distance to get to the car because they didn't have their handicap sticker. Well, maybe they could have gotten one. And of course, I can't tell how many people I see that have. I'm not arguing utilitarianism here. I'm arguing that that ends up being the thing. I'm arguing that's a violation of life, liberty, and property. And now, see what's happened, typically before the government started and people started writing perversions of law, that you could defend your property. You could say, get off of my property. I don't want you on my property. And now you can't defend that property. The government tells you what to do with that property. And there's thousands and thousands and millions of examples of this. And then we wonder why we got volumes of law books that are yay thick. Now, of course, I've been going on here with a little bit of a soliloquy and not using the great source that I have available here with Frederic Bastiat, the law. Let's just see what he has here. He talks about, I don't want to get in the middle of thought here. It's evident then that the proper purpose of law is to use the power of its collective force to stop this fatal tendency to plunder instead of work. Some people will steal instead of work, so we use the law to stop them. All the measures of the law should protect property and punish plunder. But generally, the law is made by one man or one class of men, and since law cannot operate without the sanction and support of a dominating force, this force must be entrusted to those who make the laws. This fact, combined with the fatal tendency that exists in the hearts of man to satisfy his wants with the least possible effort, explains the almost universal perversion of the law. Thus, it is easy to understand how law, instead of checking injustice, becomes the invincible weapon of injustice. So, and again, like I said, in this excerpts that I pulled out of the law, there's a ton of them, but the results of legal plunder. Now, legal plunder is where the law says it's okay for us to take from you and give to somebody else, whatever might be your property, whether it be your handicap parking spot or your what you can do with your property, what you can build on it, etc., or the money you earn. But it says here, it's impossible to introduce into society a greater change and a greater evil than this, the conversion of the law into an instrument of plunder. Now, what are the consequences of such a perversion? It would require volumes to describe them all, and we're in them now. This was 1850 by Frederic Bastiat. And we're in these things so deep, and the people are so accustomed to them, and it's been inculcated into their cranium that these are good. These tyrannies that Jeffersons swore upon the altar of God over against every one of these tyrannies upon the mind of man are so prevalent in society. And I swear that same eternal hostility. I just hate these tyrannies. And people bring them up and they say there should be a law to do this and do that. And they're talking about laws to violate people, to violate their life, liberty, and property. The family divorce code, whatever, how thick is that here in California? And it's a ton of perversion of law. It said, this is this way, that way. Now, it might be right 6 out of 10 times, but it's organized injustice. Because even if it was right 6 out of 10 times, it takes away the individual's decision power, decision-making power. And it sets up a system that takes away the consequences of people's actions and their decisions to divorce or whatnot. And so now the new so-called decision about whether or not gays can marry. I had a friend tell a joke, why would they want to get married? Don't they suffer enough already? And the thing is, why would they want to be subject to a marriage code? Something by the state that decides what they can and cannot do. And it also decides the splitting up of assets and whatnot. And it violates the right of contract because it says, oh, they don't consider that, some lawmaker doesn't consider the decision that two people make as being good enough. Or, it also imposes an obligation on somebody else. Somebody's right to, be forever contracted to live together with one another should not impose any obligation on anybody else. And certainly there should be no obligation that says they can't contract. Why in the world would we want the state to decide and grant marriage licenses? Permission. What's a license? Permission to do something that's otherwise illegal. So, this is just so bizarre. Our driver's license and how arbitrary and capricious this gets, and with the law perverted. I had a friend, I forgot, he went through a red light, it turned yellow, whatever, $350 fine. And don't get me wrong, if somebody's action was, and it was deliberate, there used to be mens rea, the criminal intention there, criminal idea. Mens rea, is that how it's said? Anyway, now you got driving infractions, and they're treated like criminal offenses or civil offenses. You don't know where it falls, actually. Is it criminal, is it civil? I don't know. If you don't pay it, the government's going to use its force against you. And who have you violated? You haven't violated anybody. You just, you made a mistake while driving, but it wasn't intentional. This is like, whose life, liberty, or property did you violate? Now, if you're going in the freeway weaving and driving dangerously, you're violating everybody's life and liberty. You're endangering them. You're basically threatening their life and liberty. But if you do a rolling stop through the stop sign, or you go through the red light and there's nobody around, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, all of this nonsense. So these laws that help the traffic and help control the traffic is one thing, and somebody recklessly violating them and endangering other people is one thing. But when it's set up like it is as a perversion, and it's just a way to take your property from you, it's just like a tax mill, and that's the system we've got going on. Frederic Bastiat makes a reference to the idea of even the organization of labor or the organization of education by government is the organization of injustice. All right. Now, and it's funny how this works. Most people are getting an education, educating their kids. There's some kids that are getting left out. So those in government say, we need to take money, violate someone else's property, violate someone else's life, liberty, property, and set up a school and give it to these and educate these kids. Do this by force, not voluntary. Educate these kids that the parents don't have the money. Well, what that ends up being is nobody has the money to go to private school anymore, and it's all government schools. And what the kids are taught are mandated and dictated by legislators hundreds of miles, thousands of miles away, and there's no choice in the matter. And again, and then what they're told, so many things to keep their system going. One of the great things that you're told going through the public education system, inculcated in your head, is third parties cannot win. Third parties cannot win. Third parties cannot win. Here's the hypnotizing launch. Third parties cannot win. And so you're inculcated with all these tyrannies upon the mind of man, and you walk out in the world and you think you're making decisions based on your own rational thought process, and not on, but it's not based in logic. It's based on what's been inculcated into your cranium. And so what I'm sitting here telling you is that education, and Bastiat talked about it in 1850, organized by government, is organized injustice. Labor organized by government is organized injustice. Marriage organized by government is organized injustice. Now what, again, because it's the law perverted. The law is not supposed to make people do certain things or demand certain things from people. The law is supposed to deal with people who have violated other people. It doesn't even demand that they don't violate other people. And this idea that they can come up with all these rules, another one, organized injustice. The California Fair Practices Commission, the Federal Election Commission. These are organized injustices that control the situation. So these political parties, two, the power elite of these parties, the gangsters, the media moguls, or whatever, the super rich really control the game through these two political parties. And they set up rules and regulations that are detrimental to any competition. And so many of the labor laws do the same thing. So many that the United States Department of Agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. If you use the test, does this law violate life, liberty, and property, or does it secure your rights to preserve your life, liberty, property? Not does it secure your life, because that's not the purpose of government. For example, these drug laws are based on the idea that we can make laws to protect people's bodies against themselves, etc., etc., etc. Now, go to Michael Benoit 7, get a copy of Frederic Bastiat's Law, get a hold of me for a copy of Tyranny Busters, The Sham and Shame of the Federal Income Tax. That's at mblibertarian7 at earthlink.net. Again, I don't want to make this too long in the tooth, but what is the difference between law and the perversion of law? And what is your power and duty as a juror? I'd say it's to convict people that violate other people and to set people free who violated nobody, who just exercise their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that'll go a long way to restoring the American dream of freedom. This is Michael Benoit, and this is a Tyranny Busters presentation. Thank you for joining.